Hello everyone and welcome to the program Business Point on Global Television. I am Samuel Odi. Many thanks for joining on today's edition of the program. So on today's edition we'll be looking at, we all know that there's a trade war currently going on the global economy, and then there have been tariff increments by President Donald Trump. He tags it Liberation Day tariffs. So we'll be having those conversations, and then we'll be looking at the impact of these tariffs on the global market, and as well as we'll focus more on Africa as an economy that is coming up. So let me bring you up to speed with the current realities and happenings in the world of trade, and also based on Donald Trump's tariffs. The US President Trump announced on the 2nd of April 2025, a broad list of tariffs as part of Liberation Day agenda that would reshape global commerce and rebalance perceived trade imbalance. This policy includes a blanket 10% tariff on all imports from the U.S. starting from April the 5th, and higher reciprocal tariffs against certain countries based on their trade surplus and protectionist wars starting April 9th. Several African nations, including Nigeria, were hit by these reciprocal tariffs, which have several economic implementations for the continent and Nigeria in particular, as it also has a 14% tariff on exports to the U.S. Here are some of the effects on African economy as whole and Nigerian's economy and trade specifically. Impacts, we'll be looking at the impact on African economy. But before we go deeper into all of this conversation and the detailing on how it's going to affect the African economy, let me bring you up to speed with the current speech report by President Donald Trump. Take a listen, we'll be right back.
Speaking in the White House Rose Garden against a backdrop of U.S. flags, Trump slapped the most stringent tariffs on China and the European Union on what he called Liberation Day.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
Meanwhile, the dollar fell 1% against the euro and slipped against other major currencies as Trump was speaking. Trump reserved some of the heaviest blows for what he called the nations that treat us badly, including 34% on goods from superpower rival China, 20% on key ally, the European Union.
If you look at Switzerland, 61% to 31%. Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia. Oh, look at Cambodia, 97%. We're going to bring it down to 49%. They made a fortune with the United States of America. United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing. South Africa, 60%, 30%, and they've got some.
An audience of cabinet members as well as workers in hard hats from industries including steel, oil and gas whooped and cheered as Trump said the tariffs would make America wealthy again. Uyi Agmofwebe, reporting for Global TV News.
Many thanks, Mr. Uyi Agmofwebe, for that report. So we'll be having the conversation now around the impact of on Africa based on the tariff. We've seen South Africa was, given a 30% tariff hike, and then Nigeria was given 14%, and other African nations also had their own reciprocal tariffs too that were given by the United States of America, led by President Donald Trump. So joining me to have this conversation is Sani Musa, who is an economist, and he's someone that has been following through the trajectory of the trade war currently going on, and also has been keeping tabs with the tariff hikes and why it got to this point. And now we'll be having conversations around how it's going to affect a growing economy, a developing economy like that of Africa. Good morning, Sani. Many thanks for joining on today's edition of Business Points.
Good morning, Mr. Samuel. I'm really happy to be here again.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. So let's get right into it. Are you shocked by this current tariff hike, reciprocal tariff hike?
I am not shocked because it is something that I have seen coming. So, and I think just like many other economists out there, it's not a matter of shock this time around. Of course, Donald Trump has been reeling out a lot of policies that are shaking the world trade and also the world economy. So this one is not really a shock for me because Donald Trump didn't spare the news or didn't hide the news to himself. He already mentioned that it's gonna happen, and so it is happening. It's interesting.
And so now let's have this conversation around Africa. You know, major exporters of oil. We have Ivory Coast, we have Nigeria, and then this export actually contributes so much to the GDP. So with these current tariff hikes now that we're seeing, how do you think it's going to affect this country? Let's major on Nigeria and Ivory Coast on this part of the conversation.
Okay, so thank you so much, Samuel. You see, the whole issue with the tariff is that there are different perceptions as to what tariffs can do. But one major thing that is very key is that we do not know, or there is no any fundamental definition of what tariffs can result into, because it's more like something that you can't predict how the effect is gonna felt, and that is why some consider it as a very big risk. So before I tell you maybe how the impact on the African continent or Nigeria specifically, I think we need to understand what the tariffs are. Traditionally, tariffs are not something new to the economy, or they have been there for hundreds of years, and they are just tax. They are just tax renamed to give another meaning, or to sound better for government and for people. They are what we normally call import duties. So, but tariff sounds a bit better, and they are just taxes, just like other taxes, and they are being imposed to ensure that there is a balance or trade balances between countries. So you see, this tariff, just like Donald Trump has put, I think it's more of a slap on other countries or other partners, because according to him, he put them because he wants to balance that trade deficit that is existing between the United States and the other countries, which he has mentioned and imposed those tariffs on. So taking Africa or Nigeria, for instance, in this case, I think Nigeria will just feel the same impact that every other country feels. When tariff is imposed on you, it reduces the amount of trade that will happen between those countries. Because let me tell you in basic economics what this tariffs means. If a tariff is imposed, in this case Nigeria, when you mentioned in the start of the conversation, you mentioned that Nigeria was given a 14%. This means that everything coming from the Nigerian market to the United States market, there has to be a 14% import duty on that item. For instance, if the Nigerian producer ship this product to the US, the US importer, the company importing that, has to pay 14% of the actual amount paid to the Nigerian government or the Nigerian producers before it could be used on the American market. And how these tariffs are usually passed on is they are always passed on to the consumers, thereby making the product very expensive. And when your product is very expensive, then you do not have customers, because customers would prefer to buy from somewhere which is cheaper. And in this term, Donald Trump wants to make the American product cheaper than the international product, because according to him, he wants to boost the manufacturing capacity of the country. So this is what it does. That means the impact would be Nigeria is going to have a low patronage of the United States customers, because Nigerian product would be 14% more expensive than the usual price, thereby reducing the trade that exists between these countries. And that is the same that applies to all these countries. China has even the worst percentage, 67. You can imagine, when you have any trade tariff beyond 50%, then it is very unlikely for trade to happen. So I think it's going to affect Nigeria, but not just Nigeria, but also the United States, because of course whatever we are bringing, Nigerian government might retaliate with other similar tariffs, and before you realize, it is creating a major shift and a very big challenge in the trading activities that happen between these partner countries. So the effect is just that a decline. We would see a very dramatic decline in trading activities in these countries.
Let's look at it from this other angle. Looking at Nigeria now, export is one of the major contributors of the Nigerian GDP, and projection by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu says that we are expected to see a growth of 4.67% come the end of 2025. That's looking at our GDP rates now. On the other hand, export-oriented sectors may fall, leading to job losses. How do you think this can affect businesses, specifically SMEs who depend more on exporting goods to the United States? How do you think this could impact or their trade relationship with this current tariff hikes?
Yeah, okay. So you see, trade relationships are going to be negatively affected. There is no doubt. Because a tariff is just like a punishment. I'm slapping you because I am not enjoying doing business with you. Or according to Trump in this scenario, you are not patronizing as much as I am patronizing from you. I think that is his main essence, which of course it's very arguable. The sense of it is very arguable. So it is going to negatively impact, because now that he is putting all these barriers, all these tariffs, he is raising them. Nigerian exporters are going to have, just as I mentioned earlier, low patronage from the United States market, because the United States importer will find the product very, very expensive. Let me tell you this thing. A simple example is, if for instance Nigeria send oil to the American continent, or let me use some other products which are more easy to understand. For instance, Nigeria exports an avocado in this scenario. Let me make an example with that. And this avocado cost $1 on usual terms before the tariff hike. And now Mr. Donald Trump is saying, you have to. We are imposing 14% on you. That means each avocado that comes from Nigeria at $1 is now coming to Nigeria at $1.14. That is 0.14 increase. That is the 14% of the normal $1. And you know who pays this? Not the Nigerian producer or the Nigerian exporter, but the United States, the company importing from Nigeria. They are the ones to pay this 14% increase. And what companies usually do, or what businesses usually do, is they pass on this cost to the consumers. Thereby the consumer who was buying the avocado at $1 will now have to pay $1.14 just to take the Nigerian avocado. And this is according to Mr. Donald Trump's census, that instead of the American producer or American consumer to buy such kind of expensive avocado regardless of the quality, it will now incentivize the American producer. Instead of importing, he would rather create an industry and manufacture that same avocado that comes from Nigeria, and the customers will rush for the American one, which shall be cheaper because there's going to be tax cut on the companies. So if you notice now, the impact on the Nigerian exporter is a negative one, because the avocados will be very expensive for him, and as a result, he would have a low patronage. And when businesses are meant to generate revenue, businesses are meant to sell. When you have a low patronage, your business is affected, and you hardly do any good returns. You hardly make any good returns. So that is actually what is going to happen. It's going to be a very negative one, and that is why countries have not had the reaction of the Nigerian government yet. But that is why countries are crying over it. The European EU has said that there is no order in this disorder. You hear the Australian Prime Minister saying that this is not an act of a friend. So there are a lot of dramas. No one is happy with tariffs, honestly, because the United States is a global player, and globalization has always yielded better economic result than what is currently the situation of the tariffs. So it's totally a negative one. But as I said, it might be of positive use for the United States, but arguably maybe not in the short run, and that depends on a lot of other factors, which of course we may discuss some other time.
Okay, let's look at this other angle. We'll be looking at economic impact also on the foreign exchange pressure. We are still going to have that conversation, but you rightly mentioned earlier about the percentage. You kind of broke it down, and then automatically it's going to boil down to inflation and the high cost of living. Globally, we all know that food, that is household items, are the major drivers of inflation globally as we speak now, based on the current, based on COVID-19. We started, the entire universe started suffering this backlog since COVID-19. So looking at it now, how do you think, looking at Nigerian economy as a case study now, the CPI and the rebasing has been done to like a couple of years back, and then we are seeing a significant change back home here. But now, in the long run, how well do you think like this current change is going to affect transactions here in Nigeria, talking about food items now?
Okay. So food items in Nigeria, I don't think we are going to have that. We are not going to feel the brunt, I think, in the short run, because most of our food items are locally produced. So those ones that are locally produced would hardly feel that impact of it. It's not going to translate directly into high cost. What we're talking about is the items that are going to be affected are mostly the items that we get from this particular country, the United States. But what we produce locally, we might enjoy the current price that we are having. So inflation is more likely to happen, or is definitely going to happen more in the United States market, because that is where these things go are very expensive. So except if the Nigerian market as well impose tariffs on American items coming into our own country. You see, these tariffs are two-way things. If a country says they impose the tariffs, it's only them and their citizens. For you, the only way you feel it is if the citizens of that particular country cannot afford your product, and that is why you lose. That is when you lose the market share. But for you, it's totally you don't feel the brunt because you are not paying those tariffs. But when Nigerian government decide to retaliate with another or with a similar tariff, for instance, imposing the same amount of tariff on these United States products, then the Nigerian market is going to feel the brunt, and we are going to see a rise in inflation. So, but for now, I think the short term, we do not have to worry about that kind of inflation just because Donald Trump is imposing tariff. We don't just see that in our local economy for now. But of course, it all depends on what the Nigerian government decide to do with it, or how they decide to react with this kind of news. So if they decide to retaliate with more tariffs as well, then we are going to definitely feel it.
Looking at those angles now, let's talk about the United States. Do you think with these tariffs, because a whole lot of pressure is going to be on the economy of the United States, do you think the United States might be able to face any level of recession due to all of these tariffs and the changes that is currently going on in the economy?
Yeah, Mr. Samuel. And this is the fear. This is why a lot of economics have fear on. Because let me tell you this thing. Donald Trump said, according to him, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. But you come to think of it, why the tariffs? He said he want to boost the American manufacturing capacity. But this also, it's so vague. You now have to ask yourself, okay, in what aspect does he want to increase the manufacturing output? Is it in absolute terms or in relative terms? I mean, absolute terms in the aspect of dollar, increase in dollar. Maybe, okay, we are making this amount of money from our manufacturing. Or is it in relative terms, maybe by the GDP? So whichever one you pick, for instance, if I should pick the one in absolute terms, for the last 20 years, the American economy has been seeing an increase in their manufacturing output. Just punctuated by the COVID-19 COVID pandemic, it has always been on the rise. It has always been on the rise. So that is if you are considering the absolute term of the increase in dollar, manufacturing output measured in dollar, it has been on the increase. So you can see that it is never the problem. What many analyses have shown is that the problem is more political than economical. Okay, the American economy is facing some challenges. And Donald Trump does not want to follow the conventional way of borrowing money because currently the United States is the most indebted nation in the world. He does not want to follow that kind of conventional method. And looking at another historical data, it is shown that the United States has seen a decline in the revenue coming from tariffs from the 19s, 1918, 1920 something, now to a level close to zero. That means no money is coming from that tariffs, because the world embraces globalization, and a lot of threat-free initiatives have been carried out, which is also a very good way of gaining alliance. But Donald Trump wants to do that in a modern world, in a modern 2025, where alliance give more results than, standing alone. We have him bringing this. The economic consequence of this is that if the world decides to retaliate, it's going to create a very big blow for the United States. Now, the United States, the manufacturing is going to increase, which is arguably not. This is also subject to argument, because you can't guarantee that just because we're not importing. For instance, who makes the best? Let me give you this example, because I am an energy person. Who makes the best and most affordable electric car in the world? You tell me BYD, and BYD is a Chinese company. So what BYD does is that if BYD ships, an American pays $30,000 for instance to BYD to ship a car, an electric vehicle from China to the United States, and upon arriving, the American person gets it at that price. But when you have tariff of 67%, that means now whoever is buying that car has to pay 67% more on top of that 30,000 to get it. So this is just normal. But what it does is that, okay, people will now opt for cheaper vehicles, which of course are produced within the United States. Tesla, GM, Ford, and other local manufacturers. He has boosted manufacturing. In his own senses, he has boosted. But what he does in the long run is he is diminishing the power of the American companies to compete globally. And he is limiting them to do that, because China will not patronize America, other places will not patronize. And what governments will do is that they will always go to find better deals. People will go to India, will go to Brazil. Government like the African ones can go to China, Brazil, India, just to click deals. And when deals does not happen in the Washington, what happens is that there is a decline in economic activity. And when you have decline in economic activity, what looms in is most likely to be called recession. So honestly, the trajectory that is showing, it's going to be a decline for the United States of America in the long run. I hope you correct this stance.
Okay. Well, before we go, we've seen Asian countries come together to be able to strengthen their bond and see how they would be able to, battle all of these tariffs and these policies that have been introduced by Donald Trump. What key do you think Africans should take, that's African leaders should take now, to be able to unite and then be able to compete with this or stand afloat in this current dire situation that the world is facing in terms of trade? In 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, so the African leaders, what they have to do is, which I think they will do or they are already doing, is to identify profitable alliances. Sometimes when an alliance is not favoring you, then you do not have any reason to stay in that. This is what the America is doing, and this is what China is offering, this is what Brazil is offering, this is what the BRICS is offering. Let me just put it that way. What African leaders would do is that they sit on the tables and calculate what alliances will give them more for profit. For instance, an African country wants to build a bridge. What it does normally is to go to Washington, sit for a deal, go to India, sit for a deal, go to China, sit for a deal, go to Brazil, sit for a deal, and then in the end compare which one is more profitable for them. So that way, that is what they will do. They will sit down, study everything that is happening, and align with the most profitable proposal to them, which is most likely not America in this instance, because America is just punishing everyone. They're just slapping everyone. So I am so sure that the leaders will not align more with America in this scenario, in this situation. They would align more with maybe the BRICS nations or something like that. So that is what they will do. And I will always emphasize, the genuine independence or the genuine liberty an African country will get is if that country is able to boost its local manufacturing capacity, and so that it can depend less on the importation of products. Unless we do this, then we will keep suffering on this kind of situations. Imagine America is now doing the same, and now you have another partner, which is China, and then at some point China say, okay, they want to do the same. So you are just exposed to vulnerabilities. But we can do that. We can solve that issues by boosting our own local manufacturing capacities in our countries.
Taking our time to join on today's edition of Business Points.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samuel.
And that's how much time will permit us to take. But before we go, we've seen Nigeria has become a member country with the BRICS. In the long run, we'll be hoping to see that the trade war and the negativity going on currently wouldn't affect so much or bite hard on the economy of Nigeria. This is how much time will permit us to take on today's edition of the program. I am Samuel Odi. I want to say a very big thank you to the entire production team, and also happy birthday to me. Bye for now.